This is a recording of the webinar Plants as Climate Regulators, originally held on September 3rd, 2025.
Our speaker holds an environmental is an environmental scientist and climate educator. She earned her PhD in environmental sciences from the Central University of Jharkhand, India. She currently serves as Climate and Biodiversity Research Advisor at Biodiversity for a Livable Climate. She is the founder of Global Climate Association and the executive coordination member and digital platform management of the South Asian Meteorological Association. Her topic is, drum roll, plants as climate regulators. My favorite topic. Please welcome Dr. Palomi Chakravarti.
Yay.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for the introduction. Hi, Jim. So, I would like to share my screen if that is okay with
Please
everyone.
do. Please do.
It's been such a pleasure to talk to you all, and all of you are already aware of what is happening. And I just want to give my perspective and add in a little scientific details of to increase your understanding and for us to work together towards the goal of making our planet a better place to live in. So I'll move to the topic directly because Hart has already introduced me.
Excuse
So
me, Palomi. Are you set up to put it in the slideshow mode?
I'll definitely do that. Thank you. Thank you for
Okay,
the
thank you. Thank you.
That's
yeah.
better.
So first of all, I would like to start with what our understanding about climate and weather is. The weather, as we know, is short-term atmospheric conditions that we experience day to day. This can be the temperature fluctuation, the rainfall events, the wind patterns, the snow, and the humidity. This is something like the weather might relate to how your daily mood is. Climate, on the other hand, is the long term averages of these short term atmospheric conditions, and the normal climate of a region is the 30 years averaged values of all these different parameters. So, temperature averages and extremes are studied under climate, seasonal precipitation patterns, and recurring weather phenomena. We can think of climate as our personality. So, beyond greenhouse gases, which is the hot topic that everybody knows about, how do land, water, and vegetation regulate our experience of heat, rainfall, and extremes? So, I'd like to start on that note. Let me go to the next slide. Sorry. This is not letting me. Yes, sorry. So now, beyond carbon, the climate infrastructure, there has been a misconception, as this entire group knows, that climate change is typically framed as just as a greenhouse problem, but the real stability of our climate system lies in the living systems. On that note, I would like to introduce to a term that is known as micrometeorology. This was the core of my PhD dissertation, and this is the science of small scale processes at the land and atmosphere boundary that, when multiply across landscapes, regulate the regional and global climate. I'll explain more about meteorology in a minute. So micrometeorology is a very small scale we study the small scale processes of energy and mass exchanges between the our land surface where we all live and the atmosphere right on top. What is the biodiversity's role here? The richness of life drives these exchanges. When biodiversity collapse happens, the living infrastructure somehow destabilizes, both us, the humans, and wildlife become vulnerable.
Mm.
Now we are talking about the radiation balance framework. To understand micrometeorology, we have to understand firstly our energy comes from the sun, and this is just the precursor. So incoming shortwave radiation is coming from the sun, and a little bit of it goes outside, as the we know about the albedo effect. Then the energy from our earth is emitted in the form of long wave radiation. The net radiation that remains is the energy that is available for all of our survival. The 8 billion humans that are here and all the other species that surviving on this planet are dependent on this net radiation energy. And this is something that is studied by the micrometeorologist. And stability depends on how energy is partitioned at the land surface. And vegetation is a primary regulator of this balance. So this is something we need to, ponder about. This is the radiation balance equation. I don't want to go deep into it, but this is basically, if you see here, it just shows the equation where the incoming shortwave radiation, that is the sunlight that comes to our Earth, and a little bit of it is reflected back as albedo. And also the incoming long wave radiation from the atmosphere, it comes to our Earth, and the Earth itself emits its long wave, its heat or energy in the form of long wave radiation. So the net radiation, the one I was talking to you about, the balance between all the incoming energy and the outgoing energy, this is the main crux of the matter that is important, and it is like essential for our survival. This is what is making us live. This is the That was the first equation, was the surface energy balance. Once the net energy or the net radiation comes into the earth surface, it is then partitioned or divided into different processes. Think of it as a budget. You get your salary at your home, and each you pay rent with it, you buy food with it, you fill your tank of gas, I mean, like, you fill your car's tank with it. So these are the different ways you partition your budget of money, right? In the same way, the energy that comes into the earth surface in partitioned in different ways by the first one is the H is the sensible heat flux. It is the heat that we feel. Then the other equation, the second part of the equation, is the latent heat flux. It is the heat that is trapped in the molecules in the plants, in terms of them storing the water in the water bodies when they heat up and they store the energy in them. So this is the hidden heat. G is the ground flux, or it is something known as when the earth itself, it takes up some energy in the mornings, and in the night time it releases the energy back in terms of heat. And F, which is not considered as much in studies in scientific research, is the energy taken up by the plants all over the world for the process of photosynthesis. This is only 1% of energy that they take up, and scientists do not usually consider this as a mainstream focus. Now we will be talking a little bit more about what are these different surface properties or the micrometeorological parameters. The first is the albedo. I'm pretty sure many of you have heard of albedo, which is the nothing but the fraction of sunlight that is reflected by the surface. And there are studies now going on that focus on how much, if you just remove the albedo, you just reflect the sunlight from the earth's surface, we will be good, the global warming will go away. But that is not the case. Why? Because most vegetations, although they lower the albedo, means they take up this energy within themselves, and in turn they increase the solar absorption. This heat that is taken up by the plant, what it does is it enhances evaporation and in turn transpiration. And this is essential for our climate system and water system to continue. Then coming on to the surface roughness. Roughness is the measure of the surface texture that affect wind speed and turbulence. Give me a moment, please. I'm sorry. So surface roughness means if there's a bare ground, the surface will be flat. Dense vegetation increases roughness and enhances something known as turbulence. This turbulence helps the pollutants and all different wind elements, mass and energy elements to move in the atmosphere. The third one is the radiation balance. The difference between the incoming and outgoing radiation, like now I told you that this is imperative for the functioning of our survival, and vegetation alters both absorption and emission of radiation. So if there is a more vegetated area, solar absorption will be more, yes, albedo will be less, yes, and the evapotranspiration will increase, and we will talk about that in a few minutes. The next is in the equation you might have seen these two terms Le or lambda E, which is the latent heat. This is the energy transferred through evaporation and transpiration stored in the water vapor itself. So the stomata of the plant, wherever the water is stored and as a is stored, the heat is hidden within them. Plants boost the latent heat via transpiration. So when transpiration occurs, latent heat is released, cooling the surface. Sensible heat flux. This is the direct energy transfer from surface to air. Vegetation lowers the sensible heat by diverting energy into latent heat, moderating temperatures. So imagine this sensible heat and latent heat is two balancing things that is happening in when there is vegetation present on the ground. If there is no vegetation present on the ground, the energy that we receive, the earth receive, it will be directly released into the surface of the air to make the surface hot. However, if the latent heat, if the vegetation is present, this energy is then transferred to latent heat and the surface gets cooler due to this hidden energy in the vegetation. Then talking about the ground heat flux, energy conducted simply in or out of the soil. Plants shade soil, stabilizing temperature. Again, in bare ground, the temperature tends to get hotter fast and colder fast if there is no vegetation present. If there are plants, they store the heat, yes, but they also reducing the albedo and they through evapotranspiration cool the atmosphere around them. Then we talk about the F in the equation, in the surface budget equation, which was the chemical energy from the photosynthesis. Solar energy is stored in organic matter, including us. And in the plant biomass, what happens during the photosynthesis? The solar energy, we know this. A leaf is exposed to sunlight, it takes the sunlight, it uses water, and then it produces what? Sugar. Generally, less than 1% of absorbed radiation is this F. So, in the models that we use, we do not consider F as a main factor. However, this being a very small percentage of energy absorption, how it affects is this energy that the solar energy that the plants absorb in themselves, they then change it into evaporation or transpiration, and by these processes they help in maintaining the microclimate of their surroundings. The evaporative processes, the surface budget, then whatever the energy is left goes to the vegetation, a little portion of the energy. Think of it as the food that we give to our pets. Okay, so that energy, the solar energy, is then uh, transfers is taken up by the plants, and it gives rises to this evaporative fraction. What is this? The proportion of available surface energy used for evaporation and transpiration compared to that used for direct heating of the air. So if the evapotranspiration taking place does not happen, the direct heating of the air will be so much more. That's why we feel hotter when we are in open spaces, but we feel comfortable when we are in a place that has a lot of shade. What is the vegetation impact? Evaporative fraction in forest means more water moves into the atmosphere, increasing humidity and likelihood of cloud formation. This was again, I used to study thunderstorms and how they are formed. So if there was plants and a water body and a high heat, the thunderstorm formation or the convective precipitation, which it is called in technical term, was much more in those cases. However, if there was no vegetation, that happened during my stay in that particular place in Jharkhand, which, by the way, Jharkhand is the state of the forest. Jhar means forest and Khand means the land. So that's what the in native language, Jharkhand means the land of the forest. So the forests were cut off while I was staying there to build more roads and such, and the temperature started rising. The convective precipitation or the storms or the rainfall that used to happen in Jharkhand every year during the months of March and May, they stopped. And they stopped in a way, they happened once after every 1 month or so when there was excessive rainfall. Prior to that, when the vegetation was present in those particular places, what used to happen was every day in the months of March, when, if you will know, the eastern part of India, the Tropic of Cancer passes through it. So when the Tropic of Cancer passes through it during the month of March, the equinoxes, the sunlight is maximum. So in the daytime, and the area of Jharkhand, the state is a plateau region. It is called as the Chota Nagpur Plateau. So at the daytime, the sun rays used to fall in the plateau. The stone and the vegetation used to heat up. The heat, the evaporation by the vegetation and the water bodies nearby used to cause the formation of thunder clouds. It is known as the cumulonimbus clouds. In the afternoon, every afternoon at 3 to 7 on till 7, there would be heavy rainfall and the weather would be very cool in the night. This process repeated um, every time during the pre-monsoon period, and this helped the farmers over there because the plateau region of Jharkhand has a very tough soil. So this pre-monsoon or the rains that happened before the monsoon season in India used to help them prepare the soil. The soil would become soften up and it would absorb more moisture. But slowly what started happening was that the trees and everything has been cut off to create some 4 lane highways or something like that in India. And in that particular area I was living in, and the day heat would continue in the month of March to May. The morning heat would be excessive. In the afternoon, there would be clouds, but they would not rain because the evaporative fraction or the evapotranspiration was not taking place as much. There would be thunders and lightning, but no rainfall. Once a month, there would be a huge storm with lot of lightning and thunder, and the rain would be excessive in that point of time. This is an image of a pan meter, which essentially measures the evaporation that takes place. This is a very outdated device, but this was something that was used there. Mm. Then let's talk about the atmospheric boundary layer dynamics. I know this is a very complex word and difficult to understand. I'll try to make it a little easier for you. So, the lowest part of the atmosphere, that is near to the surface of the land, is known as the atmospheric boundary layer. This atmospheric boundary layer height is dependent on what is happening on the land. If there is higher evapotranspiration by vegetation, the atmospheric boundary layer or the planetary boundary layer height comes down. So all the chaotic weather related activities, the heat is rising up, the energy exchange is taking place, the mass exchange is taking place by the water droplets that is evaporating and then transferring their stage. All of this causes turbulence or movement in the atmosphere, and what I was talking to you earlier about, it brings in convective precipitation. So this lowers the atmospheric boundary layer height. Convective precipitation is the rainfall caused by rising warm moist air that condenses into clouds. Evapotranspiration from plants promotes convection, increasing rainfall probability. So this is how, if there are vegetation on the surface of the earth, the atmospheric boundary layer will go down. If there is bare earth is there, there will be more heat rising up. And as you know, if there's no moisture, the heated air keeps rising and rising, and the layer will be so much taller. Then the balance of energy, surface fluxes, that is the latent heat, the sensible heat represents the collective exchange of these heats and the ground heat. Vegetation critically influences how this energy is partitioned or divided among these fluxes. This partitioning directly alters our local temperature and also the humidity patterns, creating the microclimates that can differ significantly from regional conditions. So, if there's a vegetation patch in our own area, and that used to happen in where I stayed at also, the where I stayed in the that was the campus, my campus was away from the city. There used to be small isolated thunderstorms happening there, so once upon a time. I mean, it's like once in a few days, but that did not happen in the main city. That was the bare area with a lot of concrete. So this vegetation and the um, land surface structure or the land surface uses really affects the energy exchanges, and this in turn maintains the regulates the microclimates of the area. And this has been also this was a part of a study I reviewed. Now, what are the consequences of vegetation staying? So altered albedo often increases, reflecting more sunlight and reducing convective rainfall potential. So, all albedo going out in the atmosphere is not a good sign. We need some of them to bring in convective precipitation or rains. Decrease surface roughness. Again, bare or plain ground will have lower surface roughness, and that limits the vertical mixing of air, heat, and moisture. We need moisture, we need heat on the land, and we also need something called wind shear and turbulence to bring in these rain convective precipitation or different types of rainfall. And surface roughness is one of the agent that helps with that. If a ground is bare or it doesn't have the vegetation texture present, the surface roughness will be lower, reducing the rainfall chances of rain happening. Then loss of vegetation will also cause less evaporative fraction, as we discussed, and more direct heating the air, leading to hotter, drier microclimates. And also, finally, changed boundary layer dynamics, which will affect the pollutant dispersion and destabilizes local climate pattern. Now, this is one thing that is in a sort of a in a not a positive way, because if the boundary layer height is high, the dispersion of pollutant happens over longer over larger surfaces, so it spreads evenly and the land area is spared, you can say. But if the boundary here layer height is low with the vegetation is full, the pollution will remain in that particular area. And but the positive aspect of this is the plant themselves, they attract the pollutants, be it air pollutants, be it gaseous or particulate pollutants, and or be it the noise pollutants, everything the plant themselves they store among in their leaves and such, and then they stabilize these microclimates. Now, this we have already talked about. I will move to the hidden cost again. More, we already talked about this, more heating and less cooling. So energy shifts from evaporative cooling to directly heating. Here, the air, and then stagnant air. Reduced surface roughness means less air mixing and ventilation. So, roughness is important. Then, also soil degradation. Reduced water storage creates feedback loops of drought and heat. So, if there is less moisture coming into the surface of the soil, it is not able to absorb once it comes. So, there will be just flow, the runoff. Again, rainfall disruption. This is regions like Amazon may lose 20 to 30% of the rainfall if deforestation continues. Temperature extreme. Deforested areas can experience increase of 2 to 4 degrees Celsius locally, with heat waves becoming more intense and frequent. I was in the last 3 years since 2023 and 2024 were severely heated in the South Asian region, where uh, the local temperatures of our area used to be earlier, what used to be like maximum 40 degrees Celsius, that went to like 48 degrees Celsius last year. My laptop got burned. There are burn marks on side of my laptop screen because of the heat of the extreme heat. And then climate destabilization. Lower evaporative fraction creates again hotter, drier microclimate, which alters the boundary layers, worsen air pollution again, amplify the heat extremes, and the feedback loops accelerates this degradation. Again, the soil degradation happens where up to reduces water storage up to, like I was telling earlier, 60% of the water storage of that soil is reduced. So it cannot store water any longer. Now, how do vegetation help this regulation? Cool temperatures, forests cool the temperatures by 2 to 8 degrees Celsius through shade and transpiration, recycle rainfall locally, and trigger precipitation to moisture. Again, buffer temperature extremes by reducing daily temperature swings. You might have heard of this diurnal temperature range. So diurnal temperature range, or DTR, is the subtracted value of highest maximum temperature from the minimum temperature from the maximum temperature. A bare ground will get heated up fast and get cool down fast as well. However, if there is vegetation, the heat is stored within in the vegetation surfaces, and the division between the maximum temperature and the minimum temperature is lowered in presence of any sort of vegetation, especially natural vegetation. Agricultural lands, cover crops reduce soil temperatures by up to 10 degrees Celsius versus bare soil. Diverse crop system maintains higher soil moisture and humidity. Agroforestry system combine benefits of crops and trees. So if you have a system where there are more than one type of crops instead of a same similar crop growing, which also will reduce the surface roughness, it is good. Again, urban greenscape spaces, trees can reduce ambient temperatures by 2 to 5 degrees in the cities. Green roofs and walls. This is a study by EPA's 2016 by the US EPA. Green roofs and wall moderate building temperatures. We know this. Again, urban forest filters air pollution and reduce urban heat island effects. So these are some of the data that I just showed. Healthy forest can reduce local temperature by up to 30% compared to deforested areas. 40% of the rainfall over continental areas come from land. So the thunderstorms that occur on land, not the cyclones or hurricanes, thunderstorms that are occurring on land are and brings these rainfalls are a result of the land heating up and the associated vegetation rather than ocean evaporation. 2 to 8 degree Fahrenheit of urban benefit. So if you have like an urban landscape, the urban temperatures, and with greenery in it, the tree cover can reduce the temperature by 2 to 8 degrees Fahrenheit. Again, I keep repeating this. These forests are our we are more than just they are carbon stores or like something that we just use of. They are living beings who are regulating the atmosphere. They are pumping water vapor into the air through evapotranspiration, which is the like the biotic pump theory, cool the surface and form clouds, moderate albedo and daily temperature swings, which is the diurnal temperature ranges. And diverse forests are especially resilient with different root depth. So there are different types of forests have different uses, and seasonal cycles ensuring steady fluxes across the year. So if there are diverse kind of forests which have their different growth, some are perennial, some are evergreen, some are deciduous, so they have different strengths. So if there is a forest of not monoculture but a diverse forest, it is better for the regulation of the microclimate. Where do wetlands and grasslands come in? Wetlands act as water batteries, storing and releasing moisture. Then they stabilize the hydrological cycles. They store a lot of carbon in saturated soils, and there the latent heat flux in the wetlands cools the surrounding air masses. This is very important. Wetlands are everybody, especially in India, they are just clearing out wetlands, removing all the waterfowls that were present there. To this has been happening in South Bihar, in areas where there were rich wetland. There were these Ramsar sites, and they have been just destroyed to build some building or something. And grasslands also, India does not have a lot of grasslands, but grasslands wherever there are, they have a deep rooted plant recycle system where the soil moisture is present even during droughts. And the biodiverse grasslands, which have grasses, forbs, which is a soft stem plant, but unlike grasses, they have longer leaves. Longer leaves means they can have more evapotranspiration and they store more moisture in. Grazing animals, they ensure that resilience against the extreme climate. Oceans and reefs, we already know that the oceanic ecosystem and all the flora and in the ocean, what they do is they absorb the carbon and they store it. They regulate ocean heat fluxes. So that is done by somebody completely different. They have their own ecosystem going and protect coastline from storm surges. And then something about the animals, they are the hidden climate engineers. So what do the elephants do? In India, they will disperse seeds and open forest gaps, influencing canopy structure, light penetration, and water fluxes. Again, India has is a mega biodiversity country, and it has many sorts of some places there are rainforests, some places there are like tropical environment, some of it is like temperate climate. So elephants are found in southern part of India and also northeastern part of India, and they help in maintaining the forest system and the water fluxes. Large herbivores maintain grasslands, preventing shrub encroachment and sustaining soil atmosphere exchanges. Then comes Jim's favorite animal, the beavers. They create wetlands that store water, increase latent heat flux again, capturing the heat within themselves, trap carbon, and boost biodiversity. And animal act as climate regulators to something known as trophic cascades, that is the chain of ecological effects triggered by their presence of absence or absence. So if these animals are not there, there will be a chain reaction and a domino effect, and the microclimate or the climate of that particular area will be destabilized. Finally, going on to some sort of practical pathways and solutions where I'm with some people who are already doing so much work and I want to learn from you. So, but I would just give a few ideas that are already everybody mostly knows, that is to preserve old growth forests. So, right now, how Carl was talking about the wildfire. So, if the old growth forest of the Californian redwood were present, the wildfires would have maybe been lesser in the extremity that it is now. Reforest degraded lands. Yes, we need to do that. Create forest corridors, transform agriculture, shift from the monoculture variety and go back to the traditional methods of having a bunch of crops, crop diversity, take personal action, create community gardens. If you have any space within your own home, you just fix that. This is a picture of a mango tree of my home. This is like a 90-year-old lady, this mango tree is, and she has the best mangoes, and we are trying to preserve her and keep her intact so she keeps giving these fruits year after year. Then and I live somewhere in India which is amidst of like a huge population, and everywhere there are buildings and means like apartments, and my area is the only area, like my home is the only spot which has some greenery left in it, and we are trying to protect that against pressure from others to change it into something else again. So redesigning cities, we have to expand urban forest and parks, install green roofs and wall, and restore urban waterways. Some of the real world success stories me and Hart we were discussing, and I'm pretty sure you all will uh, give your input on it. Some one of them is the Africa's Great Green Wall, where they have actually brought back rainfall by plantations, that did not cost as much without so much of technological intervention. This was done by the villagers of Africa. Again, Rajendra Singh's, who is an known as the waterman of India, in arid Rajasthan, which is the Thar desert, completely devoid of water. What he did was traditional water harvesting technique, that was the earthen dams known as johars were created by the community themselves with vegetation restoration. So they created a space where they could hold the rainwater, and creating earthen dams. It did not cost the villages much, and through this they revived 12 rivers that were essentially dead, and transformed drought prone areas into water abundant regions. Again, the European heat wave, wherever there was like a heat wave, if presence of biodiversity or if presence of vegetation was there, the temperature spikes have been lesser than those areas that were completely urbanized. What can we do? First step would be to learn to recognize microclimatic effects in your local environment. How are the energy and mass exchange happening in and around me? What can I do? Do I need a manicured lawn? Can I plant something else there so that there is a little bit of difference to the diversity of the plants, and I bring in more, maybe invite in more insects or animals to come into our small gardens. Start small. Maybe we can start by planting trees, support local restoration project, and connect with community efforts. And now is a good time to connect all over the world thanks to Zoom and all the wonderful technological tools that we have, and advocate for vegetation based climate solutions. By restoring vegetation, we directly regulate microclimates, create a more stable, resilient climate system from the ground up. And here are a few pictures of there was a event that I hosted uh, uh, under this Global Climate Association flagship, where we went to schools, different schools in India, and some schools in US as well. This little girl was a 4-year-old participant from nearby Massachusetts area, and we told them to pledge your uh, alliance towards Earth on the Earth Week, and plant some trees and show us ways how you can plant trees with minimum, and grow a garden with minimum cost and least efforts. And then these little children from the schools of India, from US, from different places, they did a wonderful job of showing us actually, and showed it to their parents that how this can be done. And these are the references. All the numbers I talked about have been taken from these scientific articles. I'd be happy to share it with everyone. With that, I close my talk.
Thank you very much, Palomi. Well, let's take some questions. I have a question. This is based on something that you put in there. My question is how or why and how do diverse plant communities provide more consistent cooling than monocultures?
Yeah. So, monocultures will have trees and plants that are of the same height, same evaporative potential. Okay. When there are different diverse tree structures, they will have their different life cycles. So maybe some of the trees, like I told you, the perennial ones, they have a uniform structure throughout the year. Some of them are deciduous, so they shed their leaves once. So if we have a garden with deciduous and perennial, even though the leaves are lost from one, there is no evapotranspiration happening from one tree, the other one is still maintaining that, even though in a lower rate, because in winters everybody lowers their evapotranspiration. By doing that, there is a uh, symbiosis between all these communities, and that helps. And physically speaking, in terms of physics, if you talk about the surface roughness will also be different in a monoculture and in a diverse case gardens. If the surface roughness is, and the heights of all the monoculture plants will be same, so the surface roughness will be somewhat same. If some is taller, if some is shorter, there is undulated vegetation structure, and the surface roughness changes. The wind will move differently in a, if it in a paddy field, for example, say, or in a field of, like, with different garden variety plants.
Great. Since you mentioned turbulence, I have a question about turbulence. You said surface roughness affects turbulence. So my question is, what is turbulence and how does surface roughness affect it?
Turbulence is nothing but, if in I talk about in simple terms, when the energy and the mass from the surface is rising up. If it is rising up, there will be some movement in the air, which is not we cannot see visually most of the time, but sometime we see them as, in a hot day in a dry bare soil, you can see movement of dust particles slowly rising up. That is basically the turbulence, the movement of energy and mass happening. If the surface is very straight, the turbulence becomes less, because there is no movement of the movement of the wind is very unidirectional. It will move past straight. However, if in there are buildings, even buildings are there, if there is a mountain, if there are lots of different sizes of trees present, the winds will move in different ways, and the turbulence changes. And this is the turbulence is also in terms of the turbulent kinetic energy. So the energy also changes, and this energy is used for the feeding or the creation of the storms. All right. So when there's a hurricane, there's a lot of turbulence in the atmosphere, and that energy, turbulence is basically the energy that is feeding the hurricane. If the turbulence dissipates or moves away, the energy is released. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I.
Thank you. Melanie Leonard.
Hello, Dr. Chakravarti. Thank you. Very informative talk. I wanted to ask you, you mentioned that albedo increases actually reduce convective rainfall potential directly, from what I understand, rather than, as a issue of the vegetation and transpiration, if I understood you right. And I wondered if you could explain that some more.
So, albedo, and I'll explain it in, like, in two parts. Albedo in a bare surface would be sunlight coming in, and if there is a reflectance like snow, 90% of sunlight is reflected as albedo in a snow surface, because there's no vegetation or anything there, and it's like white. And that is very good for if we are on a building. So our building surfaces, our top should be white or painted with elastomeric coatings that reflects off. However, what happens in vegetation is when the sunlight comes in, it does not reflect it back. The greener the vegetation, the darker the vegetation, the more the absorption of sunlight. So the heat is not reflected back. Shortwave in any form of electromagnetic radiation are not reflected back. They store that energy into themselves by heating their own bodies. When that happens, like in a summer day, if we are outside and then we are feeling hot, why? Because the temperature is going in, our temperature rises. How do we cool ourselves? By sweating. The sweating happens, the transpiration happens in the plants, and sweating happens in us. However, if we are not there, the sunlight will come, hit the surface, and just go away, reflecting back. That is how albedo is. For the vegetation, the albedo lowers and helps the atmosphere maintaining the coolness, because lower the albedo, higher the absorption of solar energy, and higher the evaporation and transpiration.
Okay, if I could follow up. So you're saying because it's heating the surface more, that's what's increasing the convective potential.
No, it doesn't heat the surface. The plants themselves, they take in the heat themselves and they get heated. All right. And when they get heated, they are losing their to cool themselves down the same way as we sweat. They are releasing the moisture into the atmosphere as transpiration. Okay. So when transpiration occurs, the surrounding area, because that energy, the heat energy, the latent is released, and then through the transpiration, the surrounding environment is cooled down.
Okay, so it really isn't so much albedo as the transpiration effect, in effect. Like if you had a
Yeah.
darker surface versus a lighter surface, that would not be the issue, except just that the plants are there. Is that right?
Yeah, the plants. Yeah, so if there are no
Okay.
plants, it would just reflect back and then it would not participate in the equation itself. Yeah, that's what.
Okay, I was thinking that was something new, but I see what you're talking about. Very cool.
One,
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
one key piece that may not have been mentioned is that transpired water vapor is lighter than air, so it rises. And that's what creates the upwelling in that particular area, which then draws in air from around.
Yes, yeah, I do understand the biotic pump, and so I think that's all great. I just thought if the albedo itself was doing it, that might be something to put into the computer models. I
No.
just wondered, because I'm always thinking about how we can try to challenge the modelers and, from yeah, anyway, I've said enough. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, Melanie. Thank you.
Dee Dee?
Yeah, thank you. That's been a very wonderful talk. I missed the first few minutes, so I'm hoping maybe at the end we can look at those slides quickly. But I just wanted to bring in related to albedo that in the forests that are deciduous forests that lose their leaves, it's very clever because when they lose their leaves in the winter, then the snow is more reflective, right? And in summer they have the leaves so they can transpire. So it's kind of like you get the best of both worlds there in terms of the albedo and the transpiration.
Thank you for that, Didi. Yes, that's true. Yes.
Michael? Or is that Michael? Or is that Ellen?
It's Ellen.
It looks like an Ellen.
Yes, it's definitely an Ellen. Thank you, Dee Dee, for talking about leaves on the ground. So my question is, where is decay in all of this? So you've got all those nice crunchy leaves decaying down. What kind of effect does decay have on the dynamics you've been talking about?
But I just wanted to clarify what I was saying about the leaves coming off is
No,
that
no, no, I
they're
know, I
covered
know.
with snow then, and then the snow is
No,
reflective. Yes,
it
sorry.
just,
Okay.
it sparked, no,
Yeah.
I went off on a tangent, which
Okay,
is
you're
what I,
taking it
which is
further.
what
Yeah.
I do, which is
Good.
what I do. So, but we always talk about leaves being up there than being on the ground. There are places that does not have snow. We used to have snow, we don't anymore. So when those leaves are decaying, what are the dynamics involved there in terms of the
Oh.
cycling and this and the kinetics you've been talking about?
Mm. Thank you so much for your question. And that is like a tangent again, yes. But I had a professor who was in love and an expert on the litter biodiversity, and he used to say that no, we cannot survive without them because that was his expertise. So when the leaves fall on the ground, they are creating the litter population, the litter itself. And litter, we know, we think of it mentally as trash, but that is not so. When it goes down, it's breaking down the energy aspect of it is not as much, but the litter, the tree and the soil litter themselves store a lot of moisture. And it is, and if you're not on a bare ground, there is no litter, the temperature will be much higher than the dead leaves that are on the surface of the ground, which also has a lot of population like earthworms and the beetles and insects. So the leaves that are fallen down brown also holds in some moisture, which it will lose eventually when everything is decomposed by the detritivores and everyone, and then it goes into the soil system. Some of it evaporates, but litter is essential because I have, in my personal experience, if we have like a concrete floor and then there are concrete roadways and there are some litter falling there, slowly if the litter is meant to, let to continue building up, soil will be formed there, because that's how soil is made, essentially by breaking down of that. And I have that in my home back in India, and I have noticed like huge beetles and all these like insects and earthworms working a lot with it. And I usually we usually keep the litter not for, I'm not talking in climatic terms, but something that helps with our flooding. So we have a lot of rainfall that occurs in our area, and if we have those leaves and the plants growing there, they suck in a lot of moisture and helps from reducing the runoff. So that is one way I could explain it. I don't know if somebody has any other ideas about it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, Ellen, you talked about decay. And I keep thinking is the leaves have a lot of nutrients in them. And, essentially I think about feeding the mycorrhizae. There's an awful lot of trading going on in the ground in a healthy system. And some trees may need certain minerals and some may need others. But I think decay is the process that we understand the least, I think. And the idea the leaves have a second life. Juliana Furci from South America talks a lot about the decay process being absolutely essential, and of course Alan Savory too. So I think you're on to something really important, and thank you.
Thank you, Jim. We have a question in the chat from Patty McGrath. Says, less than a mile from my home, a townhouse development for 48 townhouses and roads recently completely cleared 29 acres of forest. Is that large enough area to have a measurable effect on our microclimate? Naturally, they will put trees and shrubs around those buildings, but that cannot compare to the forest. Can we measure this impact in any way?
Uh, 29 acres is a large land. Even if you have a 1 acre of area of vegetation, that will have an impact on the microclimate. So that can be measured. And for that, a certain data will be required. The first one is what is the soil type there. Second is the type of vegetation that was present in the forest. So if we know roughly what sort of forest was there, we can understand the kind of impact it had, what sort of emissivity it had. And by doing this, we can roughly calculate what the impact on the microclimate is, and which it will definitely have, I'm pretty sure.
Michael Pilarski.
Hi, Poloni. So I'm always promoting that we need to green up the planet and have more greenery, and agroforestry would be so much better than annual crops for all this. How is agroforestry being accepted more in India? Is it growing fast or slow or not at all? Where's India for agroforestry?
So, if you talk about Indian traditional practices, we were doing that from ages already. However, currently the state is that same as all over the world. There are particular crops that are very useful and only people they'll grow that. But in certain cases now they are going back. We are going back to the point where there are different plants grown. So there are oil seed plants known as karanj grown on the area that I used to live in, alongside the crop plants. And there are other plants such as Zadiracta indica, that is neem, which is basically antibiotic, that is grown in groves. Mango groves will have a lot of other cover crop. Mango groves will have a different types of uh, paddy crop, wheat crop growing next to each other. So that is something we have been doing always. And although it has become less, but it's still the like very active practice of India. Yes.
Let me do a commercial for upcoming webinars and stuff, and then we'll get back. Y'all be thinking about your questions. The questions make it, the questions add spice to this experience. But while you're thinking about your questions, here's some upcoming webinars. We're doing Forests Are Not Just Carbon this Friday at 3 o'clock. It's a great report from the World Resources Institute. Now, we know that forests are not just carbon, but this is a great resource that gives us many, many reasons and ways in which forests are not just carbon. All the water cycles, the condensation nuclei, the effect of forests on not only local and regional climates, but climates on other continents. And then on September 8th, we've got my urban pollinator garden update, which is my chance to show off my pictures of my garden. It's pure vanity, but it's the kind of garden you won't find in Southern Living or Better Homes and Gardens, but it does, I think, contribute to the biodiversity. On September 12th, the status of vertebrate populations. This is the report from the 2024 Living Planet report showing a precipitous decline in vertebrate populations, and it feeds into the upcoming wildlife and climate course. On September 15th, the worldwide loss of soil moisture, an epic report from late March of this year. It is extremely significant. 2,623 gigatons of water have been lost in the 17 years between the year 2000 and 2017. And so thank you, scientists, for giving us the information. But the distressing and disturbing thing is that they don't know how moisture gets stored in the soil. So we're gonna deal with this. And that's enough for now, except for and I've got the links to all this in the chat. Wildlife and Climate course starts October 9th. We have the early bird discount expiring this Saturday. And so what precipitated the need for a wildlife and climate course? And it is a couple things. One is climate gets way too much ink vis-a-vis the obvious, measurable, clear, and distressing decline in vertebrates, for example, or the decline in insects, both of which have declined about 75% in the last 50 years. How many 50 years as can you put together with a 75% decline each 50 years. So from the time you're born to the time your grandchildren are born, 50%, just cut everything in half. Or actually reduce everything by 75% and keep doing that, keep doing that. Can we talk about how important that is? Plus, if you have biological diversity, then that is the scenario, that is the milieu in which all what Palomi is talking about. It is the biological diversity regulates, it creates, it drives the things that create regular, gentle, consistent rainfall. It prevents heat waves. It anyway. So that's a couple of the wildlife. Wildlife is a solution to climate change, and especially wildlife habitat. Can we talk about how trees and forests are regulators of climate, etc.? So that's what the wildlife and climate course is about. Let's go to Jonas, and then after that, Glenn Gall.
Thanks, Art. Yeah, you said you wanted a spicy question, so I got one for you. I'm sure one of us is going to get into a conversation where, you someone who is more, just in touch with the narrative about, that, greenhouse gases are, the cause of all of our trouble that we're having now. And I'm sure they would say something like this, that, it's all nice about what tree huggers like about, plant more trees and it'll balance us, more and stuff. But, that doesn't matter because, we live on this, little greenhouse floating in space and the gases are building up and it doesn't matter what you do with the plants because, the greenhouse gases are simply like too much across the globe. The global climate change is too big of a problem that planting more trees is a solution. So what's your elevator pitch to kind of reach a person like that is kind of what would be my question.
Thank you for the question, Jonas. It's nice to see you again. It's been long since I saw you.
Bio Day. It was Bio
And
Day when we last talked.
yeah, Biodiversity. Yes, biodiversity. And thank you for bringing in the question that is the main issue, that why do we focus on building, our microclimate instead of focusing on the big picture, that is the greenhouse gases. Because first of all, there is a lot of work already being done on the greenhouse gases. We already know how they are harming, and there has been lot of technological interventions to address that. However, I am not the one who's doing all the work on that, maybe, or you are not the one, or we as a collective are not maybe working towards bringing the fossil fuels down. What can we do as an individual? We have to think of that. If I start thinking about the entire planet and what is everything that is wrong with the planet, I'll not be able to sleep for the rest of my life. We have to start thinking from our own backyards. What can we do on our individual levels? That's where managing the microclimate and thinking about the micro meteorological parameters or processes comes in. So because again I'm elevating my pitch because that was my field, that we have to start small. If we regulate these small energy and mass exchanges from our community, from our home, start from our home, and people see us and start building. That's what they did in the Rajasthan. The example that I showed you about Rajendra Singh, he built one small earthen dam to revive one river in his community without a much money involved, without much technology involved, and they revived the entire river. Seeing that the other 11 communities and the people who were living across those 11 rivers joined him, and the entire area of that arid region was revitalized and restored. The ecosystems were restored, the water was put in with m- minimum effort on that one person's I mean, like, I will not say it as a minimum effort. He led the charge, but he says that I did only my part on one area. This is what we have to focus on. I have to think about what can I plant in my garden, what can I do in my own backyard, how many people I can influence, and if we do that, the vegetation and the biodiversity have they provide ecological services that we do not know anything about maybe till date. There are so many ecological services provided by these. So, as I was talking about the tropical cascade, if you removed one structure, one tree, one Californian redwood from the area, you do not know what all multiple negative impacts that can happen, that can occur, that is beyond our science till today. So we have to start by that, and I hope that helps in your building your pitch as a tree hugger.
Yeah, you were ready. You were ready for me on that.
Glenn Gall.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Palomi. I've appreciated working with you and the recent post that Hart made of your transcribing your thoughts there, and those have been very helpful. This has been very helpful. I think there's a lot of stuff I'm concerned about that I'd like to get to my community to encourage them to do these things that you're talking about. And it's not easy to convince them of, the difference, between latent heat and sensible heat. But, certainly I think they can think that, hey, there's our looming potential concerns that we need to address, and heating, and how to eat, and how to what about our microclimates, and some of that is also a challenge to talk about. But I, I think but myself, I tend to think of global commons, and what happened 10,000 years ago in Western Australia affected the whole continent, as it had something to do with the drying out of the continent just by deforesting, primitive peoples deforesting that western part of the climate, from what I read. And then, oh boy, the thermohaline current, as that goes away, what's going to happen, to our commons? Well, it's going to hurt Europe for sure. Anastasia mentioned in a discussion a few weeks ago about and she's mentioned elsewhere, the Euro-Siberian boreal forest. The depletion of that has had effects uh, on drying in China, and these long-range effects. Okay, so bringing it back to my area, it's been touted as the place to go when things get too hot, or when, it's harder to grow food and all that, because I live in north central Ohio, close to Lake Erie. Um, there's a lot of good vegetation there. Cleveland is still considered the forest city. It's got more vegetation than most cities. But what happens when some of these long range effects take place? I guess this is less of a question for you than a means for discussion and other comments that might help me with my ammunition as I try to present this to my neighbors and my, the activists in the area. So how do we, I think there's a possibility, certainly a possibility, of our area being affected, uh, uh, even disastrously, because of the things that are going on elsewhere. So I'm just wondering if there's any way to understand that better, or what that means maybe in other areas that people are concerned about.
That's true. And then you are right in saying so if there's a negative impact of deforestation in one part of the world that is affecting the if something happening in China that is affecting the Europe, say same way the positives will also flow the same way, which is known as the butterfly effect. A
Right.
butterfly flapping its wings in Australia might cause a hurricane in like a different continent. So that is how intricate the living systems are on this planet, and building our own backyard, by that I mean, building our own, regulating our own microclimates, and you will see a difference so quickly. So we have to do these small efforts like, pilot projects and such. And if we do this small efforts in our own backyard, it can be bigger than a backyard, it can be a community. And like the example of the Danhi Park, the mini forest, the Mibaki forest, one of the professors during the Milwaukee Summit, he was talking about the land surface temperature. So they have done the studies. The remote sensing studies have shown the surface temperature is much lower than the surrounding area. That kind of things. And the mini forest is a really small patch. So imagine if that is in multitude happening in and around the world. That will have a cumulative impact, and it will help in terms of scientific people coming in together, science, backing that up, if we have these small pockets of examples all over the world.
Dee Dee?
Yeah, I think that the idea of cooling microclimates is so important in terms of creating places of how we can survive, right? There's another question that I think a lot of people in this community are wondering, which is Walter Jena and others have been saying that we can not just cool regions or local places or our backyard, but we can actually cool the climate through not just through transpiration, because that would just fill the atmosphere with water vapor, but through high albedo cloud formation, through regular rainfall that comes down, through the deepening of the soil sponge, providing more water for all those processes, through more diversity that's cloud seeding and rain seeding in the sky. So do you have a sense of whether this is also that we're really also talking about global cooling? Or is that taking it too far, or is that an unanswerable question? Or
It's not, and thank you for the your like input, Didi. And I loved your presentation during the last time I heard it. Probably it was on Hearts
oh,
uh,
thank you.
classes, yeah. And it gave me a lot of ideas actually. And it is not an impossible thing to think about, because the jet streams, the atmospheric circulations, they are always impacting one another. India is affected a lot by what happens in the Mediterranean, what happens in the African nations, and we are having like right now in northwestern part of India and Pakistan, they are flooded completely because of these changes that are happening in the atmosphere. So the cooling can take place, yes, and not just with albedo and evaporation and planting trees, but actually restoring entire ecosystem. So we have to have trust in that. We cannot just plant trees or uh, drop condensation nuclei in the atmosphere and think it
Right.
will be all hunky dory. That is not going to happen. In Dubai, or where was that, where there was like torrential rains as an aftermath of like the cloud seeding, and then that affected them worse than that, if they had no rains at all. So we have to understand the complexity, that if we just plant some trees and think it will help everything, no, we have to go deeper into that, understand the relation between the soil and the soil components, the living systems in the soil and the atmosphere, and whatever old trees were, we have to go back to them to have some changes. China was doing a lot of good work regarding, I have been talking to that about with the biofaclimate team as well, about the with desert soilization technique, where they are doing some sort of technological intervention to grow more plants and increase the water holding capacity of the deserts. So that can be another way. So because some of the deserted areas can be restored, and, people have been doing that. In India, a lot of land were also restored. In Brazil, a lot of land has been restored, and they are managing the climate, not just the microclimate, but on a global scale, and that is very doable, I believe.
Thank you so much.